On the Choose to Think podcast, I will encourage and empower you to engage and optimize your best thought life in practical, meaningful ways so that you can live day by day in joy, peace, and God's purpose despite all externals. This is Victoria, and welcome back to the Choose to Think podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Recently, Jim and I started the task of organizing my dad's 3-bay shop out at my parents' place. It's big. It's like a 3-car garage. Dad was a handyman and he had every tool known to man, trust me. Plus, he was a carpenter. So there were stacks of lumber, panels of wood of every shape and size. He was also a gardener. So you can imagine all the bags of potting soil, the mulch, the fertilizer, the seed for the lawn. Now, the shop is where Dad kept his gigantic lawnmower, the weed eater, the blower, trimmers, you name it. A truck, the old blue farm truck. Dad had longed to have the shop organized and cleaned out, so he had purchased large chests, shelving units, and wall racks for all his tools. Since Dad's health began to decline several years ago, the shop was kind of abandoned in some ways. Now, my parents live in the country, so you can also imagine all the dust and the spiders and the cobwebs and the critters that might find sanctuary in that shop. Since my dad passed away about 6 months ago, we have had on our to-do list clean and organize the shop. It was a little bit bittersweet being out there, just knowing that his hands had touched so many of those tools and that was his place. He used to make Yule logs, like he would take a cedar log about, a foot or so long and cut little notches out and then drill 3 holes into it. He would plane the bottom of it and drill 3 holes into the top where you could put candles. And it's just so beautiful. All my kids have one that he made. Of course, we have one. And I just remember him doing that out there. He would do so many interesting little things like make clocks. He always had projects going. Yesterday was a beautiful spring day in Kentucky, so we decided to tackle the chore of cleaning and organizing the shop. We would just get at least started on organizing, right? And let me say that when we were doing this, I kicked up so much dust and dirt because I used that big blower that he had just as a first attempt, like a drive-by or something to clean that whole garage area. It has 3 bays to it, so it's huge. It was like Desert Storm in there. I promise you that. Jim was just like coughing and hacking from all the allergens and everything. But I'm not sure how this happens. But the most piled up places, where do you think they were? It was in the corners and the nooks and the crannies and underneath things. Everything seemed to gather there. Now, the shop had been swept out numerous times. Even my dad had his caregivers up there cleaning out from time to time. My children, my boys helped him. I even had helped him before. But the corners and beneath some of the standing units were the easiest spots for dirt and leaves and grass clippings, twigs, you name it, to gather. So I want you to keep this story in mind as we attempt to do a spring reset for your mind by clearing out the subtle clutter you've stopped noticing, or you may have stopped noticing in the corners of your mind. So this is part 2 of the series, and I'm Victoria, and I'd like to welcome you to the Choose to Think Inspirational podcast. I'm really glad that you're here. It's going to be fun today because, last week we talked about opening the windows. That's a part of our spring reset. We talked about what happens when your mind becomes stale and heavy with toxic thought loops, rumination, emotional clutter, and mental patterns that quietly are draining your peace. We discussed how even small shifts, like literally opening a window in your home, can remind you that God created you for fresh air, for clarity of thought and mind, for renewal, and for life. We explored the importance of letting truth circulate through our minds again, instead of allowing old fear-based thinking to remain sealed up inside us. So today, I want to continue that spring reset with a slightly different angle. So after you open the windows and let that fresh air in, I call it the breath of God, eventually you begin noticing something else, the corners. Those corners in your home that slowly collect the things over time. It doesn't have to be a literal corner either, does it? It could be a stack of unopened mail, random receipts, baskets filled with things you meant to put away weeks ago, or even like one chair where items mysteriously gather day after day. Eventually, you stop noticing the clutter because it becomes familiar to you. It blends into your environment. Well, guess what? Our minds are a lot like that too. Now, not all mental clutter comes through dramatic anxiety or obvious emotional breakdowns. Sometimes the most influential thoughts are those quiet, repetitive ones running softly in the background all day long. Subtle self criticism, low grade worry, quiet resentment, internal pressure, thoughts like, I'm falling behind. I'll probably disappoint someone. I should be doing better by now. Or what if things really never change? Now, these thoughts may not seem severe enough to alarm you, but over time, they shape your emotional atmosphere. They affect your peace, your relationships, your confidence, and even the way you relate to God. Craig Groeschel once said, your life is always moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts. I love that. It's so true. Sometimes these strongest thoughts are hanging out in the recesses or corners of your mind. They're in the background, and sometimes they go completely unnoticed. Repeated thoughts matter because they slowly shape the emotional atmosphere that we live in. What we rehearse mentally eventually influences how we interpret life, how we respond to stress, relate to people, and even experience God's presence. This is where brain science becomes incredibly helpful. Neuroscience tells us that the brain develops pathways based on what? Based on repetition. The more frequently you think a thought, the easier it becomes for your brain to return to it automatically. Part of this involves something called the DMN, Default Mode Network, which is essentially your brain's autopilot system, like the cruise control of your car. When your mind is not actively focused on a task, it naturally drifts toward familiar patterns. That's so critical here. That means when you're folding laundry, driving, cooking dinner, showering, or trying to fall asleep at night, your brain often returns to the thoughts that it knows the best. If worry has become familiar, your mind drifts toward worry. If self-criticism has become rehearsed, your brain returns there automatically. If fear-based thinking has been reinforced over the years, those pathways become easier to travel. Now, the encouraging part is this: pathways can change. God designed your brain with something called neuroplasticity, ability to form new pathways over time. That aligns beautifully with what Scripture has been teaching all along about the renewing of the mind. In Romans 12:2, Paul writes, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. By what? By the renewing of your mind. Transformation and renewal are deeply connected. We're not talking about instant perfection. We're talking about renewal. It's not pretending unhealthy thoughts do not exist. It's renewal. It's not shaming yourself for struggling. It's renewal. Dallas Willard said, grace is not opposed to effort. It is opposed to earning. That means your effort does matter, but you can't earn your way there, right? I think this quote matters so much in conversations like this because sometimes Christian women like you and like me hear discussions about thoughts and we immediately feel condemned. We may think, well, I'm still struggling with worry. What's wrong with me? Or if only I had enough faith. Or I still battle negative thinking sometimes. This is not about earning God's approval through perfect thinking, as if there were anything like called perfect thinking. This is about partnering with the Spirit, partnering with God in the renewal process. And that process often begins with awareness. Sometimes taking thoughts captive is less about aggressively fighting every thought and more about finally noticing what has been quietly occupying the corners of your mind. Now, let me remind you that, in my opinion, the act of thinking is a spiritual discipline. Sacred thinking is a spiritual discipline. It takes practice to develop and nurture the mind of Christ that you've been given. And this is one reason I am writing the new devotional called Sacred Thinking that will be available in November of this year. It's to help you practice this discipline until it becomes second nature for you. And let me just tell you, I was talking today at the paddock with a really sweet friend, and tears were just welling up in my eyes as I was telling her about the devotional. I said, you know what? I said, I've been writing this day after day, and I've been sharing so many deeply personal stories. But what I didn't expect to happen is that God would meet me there in that, and that He's been healing me. He's been revealing to me some of those, I guess, those recurring or repeated narratives that I have in my brain and my mind, those toxic thought loops that I've had regarding things like feeling left out and feeling less than, and that performance-based identity. And it has just been amazing. I happen to be in one of the weeks is all about remembering and how we remember. And so I've been thinking of things in my past and sharing those things. And I think what I learned is that suddenly looking back, I'm talking about things that may have happened when I was a teenager, right? And looking back and reviewing that, and now with what I understand about neuroscience and with everything I've been studying with biblical truth and God's precepts and the Bible itself, and applying that to my life over so many years, it's like, wow, I can now look back at some of those memories and I have such compassion for myself. And I'm not just shaming myself, but I'm beginning to rewrite the narratives on how I process some of the things that were so difficult for me. So it's going to be an amazing work. I think it's probably maybe my magnus opus. I don't know. Maybe there are other things that the Lord has for me to write later, but this one is particularly tender to my heart. And part of the reason it is because I know it's going to be impactful for you. I know that when you get your hands on a copy of that devotional, it's going to change your life. And more than anything, I hope that it gives you hope. I hope that if you're stuck in your thoughts, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you're everything you don't want to be when it comes to your thoughts, and suddenly you're going to get a breath of fresh air, even in that attitude, in the mindsets that you may be clinging to, and you're going to say, wow, there is a way out here, and it has to do with God, and He will lead you through that path. But what a privilege for me and an honor to be a part of that journey for you. So I am super pumped about the Sacred Thinking Devotional. So much so that I have in the show notes, you can find a link to join the Insider Secrets group. And it's all about the Devo. You're going to get a few like little notes and bonuses and sneak peeks along the way. And I'll let you know kind of how I'm doing and where I am and all that. And you'll be the first to know about all that. So please get on that in that group. It's just tap the link that's in the show notes for that. So anyway, in 2 Corinthians 10:5, Paul talks about taking every thought captive to obey Christ. And that's critically important as well. Basically, when you're bringing thoughts under submission of Christ, it's like, what would Christ say? What would He do? What would He possibly think? How would He regard this situation? And of course, it would all be backed up by biblical truth. That's how we take the thought and we make it bend a knee, if thoughts could bend knees or even had knees, but we're going to make the thought bend its knees to Christ and be obedient to what Christ says about you, about your situation, and about Himself even. I used to imagine that verse, what it meant is that I needed to literally wrestle mentally all day long. But now I see it differently. It's not a striving. It's not a once and done. Sometimes taking a thought captive simply begins with opening the windows of my mind to let the breath of God come in, and then pausing long enough to see what's lingering in the corners. It's really that simple. You can say, oh, there's that thought again, or there's that fear-based assumption I've been having, or gosh, here I go again criticizing myself, or wow, there my mind goes like a runaway train. I keep thinking of all the worst case scenarios, things like that. You're going to be aware of them because you're pausing to think about things. Awareness is powerful because you cannot redirect a pathway that you refuse to acknowledge. For me, it's while I'm doing mundane chores that my mind really wanders. That default mode network kicks into gear, and I begin to rehearse all the junk in my life. That's when I give way to comparison, pressures, fears, or even overthinking itself. I cannot impress upon you just how much I combat toxic thinking, as I am extremely skilled at functioning in life while my mind remains mentally cluttered sometimes. Are you that way too? One way I combat the cluster in the corners or try to rewire a new default mode network is through music or listening to sermons and podcasts. It's one way that I deal with the clutter. I sweep it all away or blow it out, kind of like I did in my dad's garage, blow it all out of my mind. And in its place, I plant God's truth. I'm going to give you more on that next week, so stay tuned. But for now, let's face it, many of us have become extremely skilled at functioning while mentally we stay cluttered and stuck. We continue serving, leading, working, caregiving, ministering, and showing up for everyone around us, while internally we're carrying enormous amounts of noise. Think about that. Over time, that internal noise can become so familiar that you may even mistake it for your personality. Maybe you think, this is just how I am. Nope. This is just how your brain has been rehearsing, and there's a big difference. C.S. Lewis once observed, we become what we think we are. Scripture says something similar in Proverbs 23:7, as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. Thoughts matter because they shape direction. Thoughts influence emotions, and your emotions influence your behaviors, and your behaviors shape the course of your life. This became deeply personal for me after walking through a season of depression years ago. One of the realizations that slowly began changing my life was understanding that my thoughts were not neutral. And that is worth repeating. Lean in and listen here. Your thoughts are not neutral. All my hopeless interpretations, my constant rumination, my negative assumptions, and my rehearsed fears were strengthening pathways in my brain that kept me emotionally stuck. Now, let me be very clear. Emotional struggles are layered and complex. Depression, anxiety, grief, trauma, and emotional pain are never simplistic issues. But I did begin discovering that with God's help, I could learn to interrupt some of those rehearsed pathways. And that's what I continue doing to this day. I could learn to redirect my thoughts instead of automatically believing every fearful or toxic narrative my mind presented. And you can too. So if you're struggling mentally right now, I want you to hear this clearly. There is hope for change. Slow change is still change. Small shifts matter. Corrie ten Boom once said, look around and be distressed. Look within and be depressed. Look at Jesus and be at rest. Now, that does not mean that we ignore our emotions or pretend life is somehow easy. It means we learn where to anchor our focus. That's why Philippians 4:8 is so doggone powerful. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, excellent. Think about these things. Notice that Paul does not say every thought will naturally drift there automatically. Nope. He invites intentional focus. That means some thoughts need redirection, some need replacing, some need releasing, and some simply do not deserve permanent residence in your mind at all. Not every thought deserves to stay. Do you remember that old TV commercial jingle? I think it's still around today. It was like, what's in your wallet? Well, I would ask you today, what's in your corner? What's in the corner of your mind? So here's the practical challenge for this week. I want you to pause sometime in the middle of your normal day and ask yourself a very simple question. What thoughts have I been repeatedly thinking today? And then write down 3 of those recurring thoughts. That's it. There's no shame. There's no spiraling. There's no self-condemnation. Just awareness. Because awareness is like turning on the light in the corner. Once the light comes on, you finally see what's quietly accumulated there over time. It was just like when Jim, my mom, and I were cleaning out the shop. We threw all 3 of those big, huge bay doors, those garage doors, all the way open, letting the fresh air finally come in and allowing us to really see what dirt and debris were lingering there in the corners. As you think about what you're thinking about, you may discover patterns of fear. You may notice subtle resentment, self-protection, comparison, insecurity, or chronic pressure. And once you notice them, you can begin bringing those thoughts before the Lord honestly and intentionally. You can say, Lord, is this thought true? Is this thought helping me become more like you? Is this thought producing life or is it draining it? And please remember that this transformation, it's usually gentler and slower than we might want it to be or expect it to be. But listen, God is patient in the renewal process. He's not standing over you frustrated because your mind still wanders sometimes. He's inviting you into greater awareness, greater discernment, and greater freedom, one thought at a time. Remember, too, that this isn't a once and done. Start slowly. You don't have to clean out everything at once, every corner. Although we worked about 3 hours in my dad's shop, we have a long way to go. We are not discouraged, however, because of what's left to do, but we're rather encouraged because of how far we have come in just a few short hours. So this week, open the windows again, let some fresh air into your mind, and then just pause a bit. Take a look at the corners too. Notice what is quietly collected there. Bring awareness to the thoughts you've normalized. Ask God to help you clear what no longer belongs. Because sometimes the most meaningful change does not begin with dramatic breakthroughs. Sometimes it begins quietly with awareness, with honesty, truth, and one small intentional shift that allows fresh air back into your soul. Next week, in our final episode of this little Open the Window series, and it's the last one, we're going to talk about what happens after you clear the clutter and create some space in your mind, because empty space does not stay empty for long. What you choose to fill your mind with matters deeply. We're going to explore how God designed the brain to form new pathways through intentional focus, why renewal requires replacement, not just removal, and how Scripture invites you into a completely different way of thinking and living. We're going to talk about Romans 12:2 a little bit more, and the renewing of the mind, the role gratitude plays in emotional and spiritual healing, and why you are never meant to live under constant mental heaviness. There's something about light entering a room that changes the atmosphere completely. And in the same way, when truth, peace, gratitude, and the presence of God begin filling the spaces fear once occupied, everything starts to feel different. Light doesn't force its way in. It's simply invited. I can't wait to share that episode with you next week. And also, if you're interested in the Sacred Thinking Devotional, please tap on that link in the show notes. And even in 2027, I'll be opening up a paid membership called The Circle. That's where we're going to gather together women just like you, just like me, and we're going to talk about sacred thinking. We're going to hold each other accountable and encourage each other in this life that we've been given. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful community of like-minded Christians and believers, just like you and like me, running the same race and chasing after God and loving Jesus and just trying to do life the very best we can with Him as the CEO over our brains, over our minds, as the leader. And we're just going to be Jesus followers in that group. But it's going to be a whole bunch of fun. So I hope that if you're interested in that, you can just shoot me an email at victoria@choosetothinkministry.com. So I'd love to hear from you as well regarding that. And I'll put you on the waiting list for that. But until next time, listen, you keep living your best thought life. You and God got this. You are not alone. And if I start thinking about my depression so many years ago, it really makes me start crying because I felt alone. And at certain seasons of my life, I have felt so isolated and alone. And I want to provide a community for you where you're not feeling alone and where you're connected. And I want you to know now that God has a purpose for your life. He's not abandoned you. And He has not forsaken you, but He is with you. And He will sweetly and tenderly show you the path to take, what to think even. He's going to help you through all of these processes that we talk about, these methods and just these ways and tips. Those are just ways and tips. But what you're after and what really changes is your relationship with Jesus. So I hope that you dig deep into that relationship and allow His love to wash over every aspect of your life. And I'm going to try to do the same for myself too. So I'll see you next week. Catch you next week. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you so much. God bless you. And that's a wrap, Brain Changer. And listen, if you like what you hear, would you leave us a 1 to 2 sentence review at Apple Podcasts? Share the link with a friend or tag me on your share on social media. would mean the world to me and would help us to keep shining the light of Christ and sharing the good news to others who are in need of encouragement. Please visit us on our website at choosetothink.co. That's with the number 2, choosetothink.co, to get on our monthly newsletter list. And if you need a guest speaker for your next women's retreat or church event, I'm your gal. Email me at choosetothink@gmail.com, and that's with the number 2, choosetothink@gmail.com. Finally, I offer limited free mentoring sessions each month where you and I can chat to help you develop a strategy for your thoughts in any area of your life. I'm a certified life coach and I have something to share. Visit choosetothink.co and click on mentoring for more details. Also, keep in mind that the messages on this show are for informational and educational purposes only. Please consult your medical doctor for all medical issues. Thank you again for tuning in. God bless you.